Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. I'm Simon Hodgkins today. I'm delighted to be joined by James Bishop. This is going to be a very special episode. I'm sure we're going to touch on lots of areas when it comes to podcasting. We might even talk about Ironman competitions. So let's get going. I want to first of all hand it over to you, James, straight away. Tell the audience a little bit about what you do, all the wonderful things you're involved in this landscape of podcasting.
Simon, thank you for having me on the show. Delighted to be here. I work in primarily podcast education, the creator economy, I would suggest it's probably best described as. A plotted history is that I moved to the big smoke of London when I was 24, started an experiential agency running bars at events. It was a great, I guess, vocational degree of how to run a business. But I didn't, I guess I learned lots of tough lessons. I spent a lot of time studying human behavior, i.e. what happens when a brand runs a bar in a field full of people at a festival and how they interact with that brand and the experience of, buying drinks and selling drinks and, how the brand shares messaging, all the rest of it, that kind of thing. For reasons that I won't go into detail of, I moved on from the drinks industry and I went to work in television, making sports documentaries for the major broadcasters for a couple of years, where I realized it was also all about understanding human behavior and what makes someone watch a TV show, what makes a great story, that kind of thing. But I realized that I wasn't that enamored with the idea of television. It seemed to be increasingly hard to get a commission, and there were lots of barriers to entry. And I was drawn to working out how you could share stories with no socio-economic barriers to consumption, production consumption. And I also was fascinated by YouTube. That got me into podcasting, and this was just kind of 6-9 months pre-COVID. We started a studio in London, which for obvious reasons got closed. And my plotted history from there is a mix of making podcasts and helping people to understand how to grow them. It became very apparent in early 2020 that about 9 out of 10 conversations I'd have with someone was not, can you help me make my podcast, but how do I grow an audience? How do I get more engagement? How do I make money? How do I get to the next download milestone or whatever manifestation of their ambition they wanted to share? And so I guess energies then were focused more on helping people who already had an idea than those who wanted to start it. So for 3 years now, I've not really spoken at all about how do you start a podcast. That's not my jam at all. It's all about how do you take something you've already got and be creatively brave and understand the community building, brand building opportunities around it in order to make something that is both commercially viable and has some kind of purpose greater than just recording some bits of content and putting them on the internet.
Thanks, James. And just in terms of growing an audience and I suppose growing a community, there is a disconnect, isn't there? Because we seem to have been force-fed a narrative, particularly with social media, that it's all about how many people follow you, how many people like your stuff, all these vanity metrics, when actually, I read an interesting quote only this week where somebody was saying, look, if you've got 350 people listening to your show, that's like packing out a small auditorium as a comedian. It's actually pretty good. So it's all about engagement as well as growing the audience, isn't it?
It absolutely is about that. You couldn't describe it better. Podcasting specifically is a subculture made up of subcultures. Right. If you take the total number of people listening to podcasts, it's already pretty small. So the idea of building huge audiences becomes complicated because if you took the 65 million people that live in the UK, it would be interesting to understand how many of them just have podcasting in their daily lives. I would suspect it's not more than 6 to 8 million, maybe 10%. And so the more that you niche, the easier it becomes to find your group of people, and the engagement then is the thing that's of real value. Like you say, follower numbers, and we don't want to get into the big social debates on this recording about the challenges around, just vanity metrics, as you said. It is about what action are you taking and how do you want these people to feel and what difference are you going to make to them and why would they want you in their life and what problems are you solving for the listener and what are you doing around the hero content that you're making to be part of their daily life. And it's those kinds of things that lead to engagement and growth and all, and all that kind of stuff. More content does not equal more followers.
Okay, I had to think about that one for a minute. Yeah, okay.
Just churning out content, which most people's go-to methodology for growing a podcast or whatever it is, it's just, I'll just make more. Just making more is not going to magically solve the underlying challenges that you've got that are stopping engagement and growth. It's about having a bunch, at this point, I think of podcasting and I spend lots of my time, we run a cohort-based boot camp at the moment, and it's all around thinking about your podcast or your creative project as a business, as a brand. What's its purpose? What's the audience? How do you want to make people feel? What's in it for you? What does success look like? How are you going to monetize it? How are you going to market it? What's its impact? What does the brand look like? What are neighboring audiences? What market do you sit within? And once you've got all those pieces of the puzzle, then maybe you can think about some creative ideas to try and tell the story that you're trying to tell. Not, oh yeah, I think I have really interesting conversations with people and other people would like to hear them. Let me share it in a podcast. And then when no one listens, I'm just going to share more in a hope that will help it to grow. That isn't going to work.
That makes a lot of sense. I completely agree. Yeah, that's great.
I would just say, and I'm stealing this from someone that I spoke to the other day, but it's so true. For the last 18 months, the word personal brand has been like a buzzword. You see it everywhere. And I think people have started to realize that personal brand, especially in I'm speaking about the UK and like the business owner, founder, C-suite, senior leadership kind of spectrum, personal brand equals posting on LinkedIn. And the new trendy way of saying the new trendy word is community. I'm going to start a community, be that a circle community or a Discord. Everyone's now, I'm starting a community because they've realized that personal brand equals posting on LinkedIn equals, again, vanity metrics. So it is a buzzword. You hear it everywhere. Join my community.
Yeah. There's a lot of discussion around personal branding, and I think some people who maybe hadn't thought about personal branding or haven't really invested in their own side of things, maybe there's a little bit of work that they need to do there. But yeah, posting every day on LinkedIn just to do personal branding in inverted commas isn't really helping, right?
I definitely see this journey that people go on where they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to build a personal brand. Let me post more on LinkedIn. And they do that for a bit and, with no real plan or purpose or story or, niche that I might want to follow them in. And unfortunately, the algorithm serves people posting pictures of, them on holiday or their cat or whatever, which is, that's a different conversation. But from there they go, oh yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. I'll just chat to some people and people will listen. And that'll help me grow my personal brand, won't it? Which obviously doesn't work either. And then from there they go, yeah, we're going to launch a community. It's the new thing.
Yeah, and I don't know what the latest stats are, but there's a huge disconnect, isn't there, between people who start podcasts and people, this pod fade that we hear about, where they just don't continue it because they suddenly realize there's a commitment. You need to have all of the ingredients that you're talking about, the story, the purpose, who's the audience, what's it for, what problem are you solving? Whereas they might get to X amount of episodes and then it just dies a death. And I don't know what the latest stats are. Maybe you know them better than I do, but there's millions of podcasts out there, but I still think there's a lot of room for people doing consistent, good content that has meaning,
Absolutely. You could talk about this for hours, and I have no sources for any of the following stats. I just know they're things that get banded around. More than 99% of the podcasting industry revenue goes to fewer than 1% of creators. So 99% of people in podcasting are making zero from their show. That probably leads to the fact that allegedly 93% of people quit within the first 7 episodes. If you go onto any of the podcasting sites and look, you'll discover that most shows are dead or haven't posted for more than 90 days. That leads to the fact that even though there are something like 4 million podcasts, and there was a huge rise during COVID, there's only something like, and the number changes all the time, but it's somewhere between 400 and 800,000 active shows. And active means that you have posted a show in the last, I think it's 90 days or 30 days. And so when they say, oh, podcasting is saturated, you know, everyone's got a podcast now. That's another interesting conversation, because there are, let's just say 4 million podcasts, but there are something like 40 million YouTube channels and 600 million blogs. So relatively, there are hardly any podcasts. But when you take into account the fact that 99% of the money is going to fewer than 1% of creators, and the biggest challenge in podcasting is discovery, i.e. supply and demand is the opposite in podcasting than it is, say, in YouTube or TikTok, it doesn't become as interesting or attractive a proposition. What I mean by that is, if I make a YouTube video or I post a TikTok, there are people sitting there basically waiting for me to post my content. And they will consume it, whether that be through search or through the scrolling or the discovery pages on those apps. People will find it, even though there's 500 hours of content uploaded to podcasts every minute, to YouTube every minute. Whereas in podcasting, you upload it, and I'm sure you've experienced yourself, not a lot happens. So you have to drive traffic to the podcasting apps to specifically listen to your show. So it makes it a tricky medium. It's not as easy as just, it's very much treated as a second-rate citizen. People look at it and they go, oh, this is easy. This is going to be free. I have interesting conversations. I can chat, right? And if I find the conversation interesting, everyone must find it interesting. So they make something, you can make it for free, you can host it for free, you can publish it for free. And then you realize that it's really tricky to get anyone to go to it. And there's no app or platform helping you drive traffic.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know whether it was a US stat or a UK stat now I think about it, but there was some research for last year where YouTube all of a sudden is, I think it was 14% of podcast listening. I think it was a US stat. So even though podcasts, you typically think of it being an audio-only medium, but with the likes of video and audio podcasts now, people are just listening to it on YouTube, even though in some cases there is no video,
That's true, but I listened to 3 podcasts today. I've listened to an episode of Impulsive with Logan Paul. I've listened to the editing I think it's called the Editing Podcast with Hayden Hillier-Smith, who used to be Logan Paul's editor by chance, and an episode of the Colin and Samir podcast. And all 3 of those I watched on YouTube.
Interesting, yeah.
And a friend of mine, a guy called Nick Hilton, wrote an article last year called The Year 2022, The Year Podcasting Died. It's a really interesting article if you're keen to get a flavor for someone inside the industry's take on how podcasting might play out. But essentially, it talks to the idea of what is a podcast and how the future of it might evolve to the point that it isn't how we've seen it to date.
And I suppose it's to some degree it's fragmentation. To another degree, it's the route that it's taking as this thing progresses. And then I come across something very recently, which was I think it was Radio GPT with AI voices, which were pretty convincing. I got to say, I think it was on a loop. I don't think it's live at the moment, but the whole world is moving fundamentally. But I wanted to come back to maybe the work that you're doing, because I want people to understand it and to see the differences, because you've got 4 or 5 things going on. You've got this ProjectPodcast. You've got OneFinePlay. You've got your own sort of consultancy through James Bishop. And then I'm also fascinated by the men's cabin. So would
Mhm.
you mind just giving us a quick tour through that? Because I know they all have slightly different things that you focused on there.
No, of course. I'm allowed to be a little bit businessy. I'll give you some business context. Right. So I started out with production company, OneFinePlay. That's our bread and butter. I like to live in the trenches. I like to make stuff. I enjoy being a creator. I enjoy and think it's important to always have a handle in like what the process is like, not forgetting where you came from, your roots, you know, all of this content production stuff, it changes it. We don't make video courses. Like there are people, peddling online, buy my course for 90 quid. I'm like, but it changes all the time. Like what's trendy, what you need to do. Like, for example, a year ago, you used to make stuff in seasons of 10 episodes. Now you need to be always on making 50 episodes a year or it's going to be difficult. So OneFinePlay allows me to have a handle in that. However, with a declining economy, potential recession, and having been self-employed for 14 years, I made a decision that I wanted to spread bet a little bit, go against my belief system for the last 5 or 6 years of just go all in on one thing and spread bet. I don't want to raise money. I don't want investors. I don't want VC money. So I can do what I want. So rather than kicking one football 5 times a week, I'm choosing to kick 5 footballs once a week, on the basis that if one of those footballs gets a hole in it, I'll still have another 4. Rather than kicking one football 5 times a week and then it gets a puncture and I've got nothing left. That's my simple analogy. I also am a believer that based on what I can see going on, and I'm a big thinker and speculator, that, you mentioned very briefly the AI thing. I guess I'm not a futurist as such, but I see evolution, right? And I see things. I'm not scared of change and things evolving. I think that we've probably, there was the whole Web3 thing last year, but I think it's actually going to manifest probably. Gary Vaynerchuk explained it as there were farmers in the field with their tools and then the tractor came along and you can't stop it. And AI is a bit like the tractor coming along. And I'm nervous about how the world evolves. So I'm spread betting. So yes, I have a production company. I can always fall back on it and it keeps me grounded. We wanted to build some technology. So I built a couple of tools and wanted to build a community of, around creators so that we could democratize our knowledge from the production company, which makes shows that have an average budget, podcasts that have an average budget of about £4,000 an episode. So you get to learn stuff, right? We've made shows at OneFinePlay from 0 budget to $50,000 an episode. So you get to see a whole range of what's going on. I wanted to take that knowledge and democratize it, and ProjectPodcast is my attempt at doing that. It comprises of a pitch deck builder, where you can create sponsorship pitches and pitch like decks to share with people if you want them to become a guest, or you want to guest, or you want to reach out to PR. Always online, up to date. A planner that takes all of our knowledge and helps you to essentially build a business plan for your podcast, because I'm a believer in thinking of your podcast like it's a business. And we've built a community and we're doing some cohort-based coaching. I then do some consulting myself. I would be transparent and say I'm not a massive fan of it because it's back to selling time for money and I don't feel a lot of reward from it, if I'm honest. But it's, in the effort of the personal brand. What I really want to do is I'm working on is building content on the top. I'm a if you think like podcasting is okay, but I absolutely love YouTube. Like YouTube is, I'm the biggest YouTube geek fan, want to work more in it, want to make more content. That's my thing. And so I'm doing a bit of consulting, but really I'm freeing up my time so I can be a creator, so I can make more content. And then Men's Cabin is a very kind of aligned but side hustle project where I wanted to start a travel company. I've recently become randomly a qualified travel agent, which is no more than like a 3-hour task. But that gives me some access to, it's just kind of a random fun thing that I've been doing. Men's Cabin gets groups of 20 to 50-year-old men together in different outdoors environments, in nature, and lets them go on experiences that they may not otherwise do. Basically allows them to have a bit of space and freedom to think and reset and relax and do some, inner work in an environment supported by someone who knows what's going on and surrounded by other men doing a similar thing.
My goodness, that's a lot, James. That's a lot going on. I love the business analogy of, kicking the 5 footballs once a week, just in case, the one ball that you were focusing on develops a puncture or, goes off the pitch,
Having a production company that is basically funded by marketing budgets, when I know that in a declining market, the first thing that will happen is there'll be 40 cents on the dollar in your marketing, in your marketing spend, doesn't make me feel wildly comfortable. So that was why I needed to diversify. And yeah, there's a lot going on, but it's kind of all steeped in purpose. There's the whole men's cabin thing and getting people to talk and share their thoughts. Obviously, well, for me anyway, I think is super important. It's something I've done lots of that kind of work myself previously, but also it does link to podcasting because the whole personal brand, community, whatever, the more you can, if I give you a quick explainer in your podcast, in this podcast, I don't mean to condemn you, but I'm just going to use it as a great example. Currently, what you're doing is having one night stands with your listeners. You're bringing in a guest. I'm doing 98% of the work here. The listener knows nothing about you. There's nothing that connects this episode to the last one or the next one. If you were to reframe this whereby you're the main character and you're going on a journey to learn stuff, then the listener will go on that journey with you. And it's much more likely that they'll listen to the last one and the next one and the following one. Because people like characters. The only two stakeholders in the podcast are you and the listener. I wasn't here last week and I won't be here next week. Right? It's not about me. It's about you. And so therefore it's about you doing a little bit of inner contemplation as to why are you the host? Why are you talking to me about this thing? What makes you the most important person, the most relevant person to be hosting this show? And then you start to share that, and then the listener comes on that journey with you. And that involves that inner work, which kind of links to opening up your heart to what's important to you and what value you can bring and where you want to go. And I guess Men's Cabin is a deeper dive into that inner journey.
I love that, James. That's brilliant. And I think it comes back to something you said at the start as well, when it comes to that, being fascinated with the human engagement, being understanding the human behavior. So whether that was in the drinks industry or your TV production background or the work that you're doing now, particularly Men's Cabin, obviously, but through podcasting and, this movement to freeing up time to be more of a creator and your love of YouTube. It comes down, particularly as a creator on YouTube, right? I tune in to some of the big names on YouTube because it's them I'm invested in. It's exactly what you're saying, right? It's them that you're the journey.
And that principle in podcasting is exactly because it's all just content, right? It's about you and it's about the vulnerabilities and the character. You're not turning up as you're turning up as the character of you that you have already determined, right? If I was I don't want to condemn your show. That's not fair. So let me just use a generous example. If I'm making a show, I know who the character of the host is, and I know what the conversation is going to be before the conversation is recorded because I've done a research call and I've run through the questions and I know in advance what they're going to say, so I can knit a story together and I can make it very niche and specific and keep it on track. And therefore in the edit that becomes easier, and I know that the listener is following all those ongoing strands, so we can keep continuing themes recurring. People like emotions, they like feelings. Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO is doing really well at the moment. Like him or love him, what he does, love him or hate him is what I meant. He does a really good job at getting people to have original conversations. He's sharing a unique lens with each of these conversations. So you're seeing people you've heard the stories of before, and he's getting interesting one-of-one conversations from them, and there are recurring themes, and you can feel Stephen learning as he goes, and you trust him with your time, even if you don't know the guest. And he does this really clever thing where he mixes famous people with unknowns, because that helps you to understand it's a journey of development that he's going on, and then you're going on that journey with him, because you're basically also, he's the voice of the listener. And so he's getting, you know, Davina McCall to cry, and Gary Vaynerchuk to share things about his mother that he's never shared before and have realizations in the moment, and Richard Osman to share his addiction story, and so on, because he's done the prep and he's considered the questions. And it's that consistent tie-in of ongoing narrative that makes you come back for the next one.
Yeah, I
and
love
that's how
that.
you get growth.
Yeah, great
And
insight.
then he's building around that this community whereby, like, he has a private Telegram that he posts every day that gives you exclusive extra access, and he's got the diary that you can buy, so that even if you're a super fan, it's in your life all day every day. Now his podcast has become part of your everyday zeitgeist, so now he's becoming an everyday, you know, and then you see him on the telly and he's all over the place, right? And that just compounds, because now you're relying on him for more than just 60 minutes of entertainment once a week.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting because when you mention Stephen Bartlett, and I think most people are familiar with him, there's been some press lately, and, like you say, love him or loathe him. It's when I think of it, the brand recall I have is not just him, it's the Huel energy drink. And that's obviously working from a sponsor perspective. Now, I know he's told the story about it. He likes the brand, he likes the people, et cetera, et cetera. But there's brand recall there as well for me.
And Mercedes and Blue Jeans by
Exactly.
Verizon. And
exactly.
whether he does it well or not, and that's a whole nother conversation. And as a specialist, I obviously have it's probably an opinion for another recording. But yes, it's all powerful. You can see why Julian Hearn, the founder of Huel, is going, yeah, you can have more. I'll give you more. I'll give you more, because you can remember it.
100%. And I just want to, before I move on, because I do want to squeeze in a couple more if I can before we run out of time, but I want to ask you just something you mentioned earlier. You've obviously got a unique vantage point, because you talked about working, producing and helping and advising companies that are maybe spending £1,000, £4,000, and you mentioned even £50,000 an episode, which to most people producing their own podcasts for free, blood, sweat, and tears, that must sound incredible. But you must have some incredible vantage points, learnings, and viewpoints. But I don't need you to go through everything, but could you just give me a few? What's the fundamental difference, other than throwing a lot of money at it? What are they doing differently that's really making a difference, do you think, when it comes to the financial investment in podcasting?
They know exactly who their audience is. They're making a show for someone specific. Like, they know audience personas down to, this is Lucy, this is where she hangs out, this is what she consumes, this is how we can get in front of her, this is who her, like, everything. And they make a show for that person, and it's planned to within an inch of its life. And they're using the network effect. So they are using other podcasts to grow their podcast, and they're spending money on doing that. Or they may, or they may not. So, like, they're guesting on other podcasts, and they are running ads in other podcasts, and they are marketing. They're doing a thing called feed swaps, which is where you put a whole part of you drop a whole episode of yours in someone else's feed, or vice versa, to pick up neighboring audience. And they're doing it in podcasting, because the problem with, and I'll keep this simple, but say you're posting on LinkedIn or Instagram to promote your podcast. If we were to take your LinkedIn audience of 10,000 people, probably fewer than 1,000 listen to podcasts. And also, when you take into account your podcasting habits, you probably only listen to 4 or 5 shows, and it's really hard for a new show to break into that circle. And that circle, you probably still listen to 2 or 3 of the first podcasts you've ever listened to. So the only way to really get in is to get into those shows, to start sharing the word. Maybe a bigger circle than that, but you've got to use podcasts. And so they're buying underpriced attention, which is ad space in other podcasts, and that's giving them results that then is worth more to advertisers.
Yeah, that's so smart. Thanks for sharing that, James. Listen, before we move on to a few other things, the one thing that we haven't talked about that I mentioned at the top was the Ironman. Now, you've been both producing and taking part, and I want you to tell us a little bit about this because it's part of your life, and it's a real. I just look at it and go, how do these guys do this? So tell us a bit about it, will you?
Okay, sure. So I sold my first events business, like I told you, and I took a bit of time off, and I was overweight I was 30, but I was not in great shape. I'd just been working and eating and drinking as you do. And I ran a half marathon and not a lot changed. And my friend said, I've always wanted to do this thing called the Ironman. So I had 2 beers and entered. And 3 months later, I was like, what's that thing we've entered that cost me £600 to enter? They went, oh yeah, the Ironman, it's in 7 months. It's a 2.4 mile or 3.8 kilometer swim, followed by a 112-mile bike ride or 180 kilometers, followed by a marathon. So 26.2 miles, 42.2K. You start at 6 or 7 a.m. and you have till midnight to finish, so 16 or 17 hours. And it's a great day out. It's a test of mind more than body. Getting to the start line is significantly harder than getting to the finish line. If you can do the training and the discipline of 10 sessions a week in the winter, in the dark, in the cold, when no one's around, you can not get injured and you can get yourself to the start line. The actual race is a bit more just like a celebration of the grind to get to that point. And then obviously the finish line, the finish line the first time is incredible. And Ironman's strap line is anything is possible. And I guess if you were to ask me, what's your motto? What do you what's the best advice you've ever received? In a roundabout way, it is anything is possible.
That's incredible. I love the insight about, getting to the start line is harder than getting to the finish line or the end line. That really made me stop and think then, James.
The hardest part of exercising is putting your kit on. It's not going running. Like, it's much harder to put your trainers on and get out the door than it is to do the run and get home.
Yeah, incredible. And was it Barcelona last year?
I'm impressed at your research. Yes, I did Barcelona in October. And I've also, in 2015, I did Ironman Zurich. And in 2017, I did the race in Lanzarote, which is hilly and windy. It is a big commitment. So around life, you can imagine it's all a bit of a culture and there's a lot to learn. And it's definitely not the cheapest sport to get into. And it's highly addictive. But yeah, there's also a real reality of the commitment. I love it as a person of extreme, because if you said to me now, I haven't done much training since Ironman, but if you said to me now, go outside and run a half marathon, it might not be pretty, but I'd get round. What I love about an Ironman is you have to always respect it. However many times you've done it, I've done the races with my best friend Lee, and people always go, oh yeah, who beat who? And the thing is, it's not about that. It's about getting you both over the finish line, and it's only you versus you, because anything could happen. If you don't put enough petrol in the engine on the race, like if you don't eat properly or drink or keep your head together, you can't race another person. It's just about getting you to the finish. And it's it's a big enough challenge that if you don't respect it, it'll stop you. And that's what gets me out of the door. Makes sense?
It's incredible, James.
You can't wing it. You can't wing it, basically.
Yeah, you've got to put in the prep. You've got to put in the discipline. And as you say, I don't know what the percentage of people who don't finish or turn up thinking they can do it and don't get through it. But it's to do what you do. I mean, just it's superhuman stuff. I mean, the bike ride, the swim, the run, incredible.
Most people are put off by the swim because it's 2.5 miles of swimming in the sea. But
yeah,
as I say,
and then go and run a marathon.
and then cycle the distance of London to Birmingham, and then run a marathon. If you put your mind to it, anything's possible.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Well, thanks for sharing that, because that's great insight, And the other thing I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to change gear a little bit here, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about you, and I wanted to find out more about you, the person. And one of the things I ask people is about their learning styles. how they learn. Is it through books, audiobooks, podcasts? Do they just like catching up and talking to people, like Men's Cabin, for example? So when I ask you that question, what springs to mind?
So I'm not academic. I wasn't academic at school. I have parents who are teachers, but I didn't do badly at school, but I didn't do well. I just did common sense well. I went to university, but I didn't finish my degree. I'm not very good if you tell me I have to do something. I also have a fairly prickly, direct exterior that catches people out, because behind that is, I'd like to think, a fairly self-aware and thoughtful person. For me, learning, I've taught myself after I sold my first business. So from starting television to today, I owe my entire career to Gary Vaynerchuk. I just watched an obscene amount of his content. And I, unlike most people who just went, oh, he's unbearable, I just did what he said. And I'm here where I am. So for me, learning was, in order to make it for a living, is something I've done by visually just consuming YouTube, basically. We are moving house at the moment. Everything practically that I need to do, YouTube. I'm not a good reader. My brain works. I think it's a self-employment thing, but it can't be quiet enough to read unless I'm on about a week into a holiday in the summer, maybe. So it's visual and it's talking to people and it's thinking. And I tend to take the approach of, I'll give anybody my time and I'll tell you anything that you want to know for free. I don't value I value it, but I'll tell you anything you want to know for nothing. Because in every one of those conversations, every time I'm doing that, it's an opportunity to learn from the other person. And then I add that to the arsenal, add that to the experience. The only reason I know more about podcasting than you do is I've spoken to more people than you have about it and digested that information. That's the only, there's no magic. I just spent more time thinking about it and digesting it and, absorbing it and seeing what happens. I have no fear of failure anymore. In fact, if anything, I just assume I'm wrong all the time.
I love that. Yeah, I met Gary Vaynerchuk actually in person on one occasion, and we had a good chat. And he's been exceptional. It's a bit like the Stephen Bartlett story, though. Some people really love the stuff, and some people just can't take it. And I don't know whether that's just the world we live in today, where there's just two types of people, or it's always a divided argument. But there's an awful lot of great content that's been shared, an awful lot of life advice there. And I love back to his Wine Library TV days, and when he did a great episode with his father as well, when they were both talking together, which I'm sure you're aware of. And I think there's some wonderful stories in that. And you mentioned Davina McCall and Stephen Bartlett. There are some tremendous, real human engagement pieces in there. The talk, I suppose, a lot of common sense, and there's a lot of good learning in it. You don't have to embrace everything, but you do have to be open to receiving the good stuff.
Absolutely. I think when you talk about learning styles, one of the things I've become aware of, and the way that I'm built a little bit differently to maybe some other people, is I like to learn by doing, for sure. I'll trial it myself, and I'm not worried about what other people think or consequences. I have fairly high, as you can probably tell, like my risk profile. I don't really mind risk. But I tend to go on the basis of, it's someone's offering me something, it's probably absolutely true. I'll believe you until I don't believe you. Whereas most people go, and I notice it on the coaching courses we do at the moment, they'll go, yeah, okay, but I still think I know better, even though they have no basis for that logic. And so I tend to go the other way, which is like, okay, I'll trust you and I'll do it, and then I'll find out and I'll go from there. I'd like to make decisions based in evidence that I have through failing or through succeeding or whatever, than guessing.
And through your life so far, then, so we talked about some key people that have influenced you, or that you've learned from, or that you followed. But who do you admire? Who's inspired you the most? When you think about that in life, who springs to mind for you?
It's an interesting question. So, creatively, there's there's some definite people, like they're all YouTube references. So if you're not in the YouTube creator economy world, it's not gonna mean a lot. Like obviously Gary Vaynerchuk's had a massive impact. I have been in the last decade wildly influenced by Casey Neistat as well, the creator. If you know who that is, he made 550 daily videos. I've probably seen 548 of those 550. A whole bunch of other creators across the spectrum, from random beauty vloggers to gaming people, all sorts of different people. As I've become older, in recent years I've realized that your definite relationships with your family, your influence. I realize now how much I've been influenced by, say, like my grandfather, who basically ran a business and was actually quite his tolerance to risk was quite high. I didn't realize that until more recently. Interestingly, my sister's a psychologist and my dad's a teacher, and I sort of work in the intersection of those two things. I admire, like, I'm not a hater of things, like, when I've always fascinated by people go, yeah, I saw that film, it was rubbish. I'm nearly always the other way. I don't know if it's just because I'm basic, but I admire, my big thing is, like, I just love anyone who is having a go at realizing their potential. That's like, we go out on an Ironman course or a triathlon course or a run or anything, like just being out there trying and giving it a shot. I admire anyone who does that. That's exactly the same with podcasting. Like, you come on a course and you want to learn how to get better. I admire you just for putting yourself in that, position.
Yeah, I agree. And films, I think, I really resonate with that, because I was recently talking to the people behind 3-Day Millionaire, which is a new film set in Grimsby. It's running at number 5 currently, I think, on Netflix. And I just reached out to the director there and I said, listen, I'd love to talk to you on the podcast, the show about it, and at the time, it's really coming from an indie film type background, and it was quite scrappy when they put it together, but it's such a great accomplishment. So whether you love it or hate it or think it's one of the best films ever made or not your cup of tea, the amount of creativity and energy and planning and love and heart and soul that went into it, it's an incredible story, and that certainly resonates with me. And you mentioned Casey Neistat. I'm certainly glad he's back in New York. Mm-hmm. I think, he's got more than one football, because he's got Candy's pool and the jewelry business. And then he had his little CNN for a while where he made some really good money. And then he moved back out to the West Coast, and he seems to be back in New York doing what he loves now. So I don't think it'll be long before we'll see him being, towed by a Jeep back down through New York in the snow or up in the air on his drones.
You have a level of knowledge about Casey Neistat that I can get on board with. I go, oh, yeah, this is a man I can talk to. He knows what he's talking about in that game. I love that. Yeah, for me, as I don't know, partly, like, if you've heard or been through as many podcast conversations and whatever as I have, and you've seen all these different guests, admiration for me is more based around an attitude or a way of life than it is what different people have achieved. Like, I don't know, I met a guy who drove the little rovers that they put on Mars, the little cars that go around Mars. Like, his job is to get them there and then drive them and work out. Like, fascinating. And lots of admiration for what he's achieved. And there are endless versions of those, but they're not the people that really excite me. Like, for me, it's all about, just how can you maximize on your potential. My wife's a cancer surgeon. She has an amazing thing every day. She removes ovarian cancer for women in a central London specialist hospital in order to give them a few additional years with their family. It's incredible. You admire that, loads. Heroes don't wear capes, For me, it's all about it's all about your approach to life.
Couldn't agree.
Is that good avoidance of your question?
It's all good. This is brilliant. There's some real gems in this discussion. I'm really enjoying it. And the other thing I wanted to ask you then, we talked about people and people we admire and heroes don't wear capes and the fabulous, fantastic, phenomenal, life-changing work that your wife is doing. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about is about advice. Now, you obviously share a lot of advice. You've got a lot of deep knowledge in these areas. But when it comes to advice that you've received, what's the best advice that stuck with you? Maybe something from your childhood, could be something from last week, could be something at a men's cabin. But when I ask you that, what springs to mind?
Advice. Well, I tell you, there's a couple of things. One is a Gary Vaynerchuk saying where he says it's all about macro patience, micro speed. So you need to move fast every day, but be wildly patient. Like in the essence of that idea that everyone they overestimate what they can do in a week and underestimate what they can do in a year. So that, I think, is a great piece of advice to take on board. The anything is possible thing from Ironman is another. There are one of the things I think is fascinating about YouTube. I heard KSI say once, it's like the only difference. No, that's a lie. Roman Atwood said the only difference between you and me is I've made a video and pressed that red button to upload a video that's free more times than you have, and now I've got 15 million followers and you haven't. But the only difference is that I did it and you didn't. There was no barrier to entry. Like, it didn't cost me anything. I just did it. And so, anything is possible is a great mindset to see where you can land, and in terms of advice. I'm sure there are loads of advice. And I'm one of those people who my exterior and the way I present myself makes it look like I'm not taking on advice, but actually it's kind of different to that.
I
I
understand, yeah.
rely on advice of others all the time.
I love the macro patience and the sort of micro speed. And he was really a big, we're talking about Gary Vaynerchuk here again, but we're talking about, he was a big proponent of putting out lots of content, and he has shared a lot of content. But I suppose the disconnect there is people just think they can put out lots of content, but his content has a purpose and a meaning, right? And that's the missing formula. Some people just put out stuff for the sake of it. And again, it's back to that vanity metric, or just thinking that it'll just happen by magic. But there's a lot more planning goes into that, and his team around him. And whether it was, some of the videographers he had following him around, and, he's a big proponent of documenting his life rather than, trying to come up with a theme every day. Like Casey Neistat, as you mentioned, got up every day and went, what's my video about today? It was his only waking thought. It drove his family nuts. But he did have his brother there and, his previous film background. But somebody like Gary then was saying, well, look, I just want to tell, my story. You can come into my office, you can come into my room, you can see how I do things. Here's me just out. And look, all these people have turned up at this event I'm at. So two, I think, slightly different approaches to it, but both making engaging content that you feel part of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely. Absolutely. It's a really tricky question. I love the question. And as soon as I put the phone down, I'm going to call my Ironman, my best friend Lee, and I'm going to ask him this question, because it's the sort of thing that we would debate for ages. There's loads of advice, like things I wish, until I was 30, I was convinced I wasn't creative. Like, I would have told you I'm not creative at all. Everyone's creative. It's in everyone. It's just a willingness to and also creativity is subjective, so you can't not be. But like, a great piece of advice is you're absolutely creative if you just maybe haven't found it yet. That's a
yeah. And I've been talking to some people recently who were saying that they didn't feel creative until that one teacher, the arts teacher, gave them a camera and said, go and take some pictures. And it was actually just a moment in time in their school period where somebody actually just took time to focus on them just for a second and gave them something which turned them into a filmmaker. Or, somebody that just in that pivotal moment in your life says that one thing to you that makes you go, yeah, maybe I could do that. Maybe that is me, The other thing I want to ask you real quick is, you've got a lot going on. You're kicking all these footballs. You've got a house move on from what I've gathered. But over the next 6-12 months, what are you hoping to achieve? What's on your roadmap? What does it look like? How does that planning process work for you?
Okay, that's a great question. We are moving only a mile up the road in about 4 weeks. We're moving from one side of the high street to the other. Okay, for me, it looks like this. I told you about the move from one football to multiple footballs. All of this is in an effort to free up enough time and space. And it's not free up time and space, it's more to prioritize the time and space to build and make content as a creator. It comes back to I hate the word personal brand, as I've alluded to. I don't think it means anything. And when I say personal brand, I don't mean LinkedIn posts. I primarily mean, so I only see, I can summarize this. The next 6 to 12 months is only about reprioritizing my life to be focused on growing a YouTube channel and growing an email list. This is outside of my personal life, which is about moving house and starting a family and all that stuff. Work related, it's only about those two things. My dad says, and you were asked about advice, one of the things I thought of saying but didn't is, my dad says work is a 4-letter word. So to everyone, there is an element of your job that is just work. Everyone has to pay bills, right? Whatever your job is, be you a cancer surgeon or be you a podcast producer, there are elements of your daily life that are just grind. It's the same, whatever you do. And it's about minimizing the things that I'm not great at by finding people I can work with who are better than me at those things, maximizing on quadrupling down on the things that I am good at, and putting my energies into increasing a YouTube channel and email marketing, an email list, because I am a strong believer that we are moving towards an era where your social your social score is going to be as important as anything else. The community that you have around you, your profile, your presence, is going to impact your life significantly over the next decade. Yes, some people are already ahead, but the game, it's still the beginning. I think it's going to get to the point where we're still in the era of people looking at who went to uni, where you went to uni when you apply for a job. We're going to go the other way to it doesn't matter about uni, and it doesn't even really matter about what you've done. Tell me about your community. You're going to pick your next marketing manager based on the proof they can provide you around the communities that they've built. Whether that's relevant to your job or whether it's totally different, the idea that they've built a community of people, that they've shared their story, that they understand who they are, they understand and can articulate what their purpose is, what their mission is, and they can share that with people. I think we're going to see more people being successful that have done that exponentially than those who haven't. So that's basically what everything tracks towards.
Well, thanks for sharing that, James. That's really a really exciting time,
I might be totally wrong, but I'll have fun finding out.
I'm sure you will. Absolutely. Listen, the last thing I want to ask you before we wrap up today is if there's anything else that we haven't touched on that you think is relevant for our international audience, please do share it. And also, and importantly, if people want to find out more about all the areas that you're involved in or reach out and connect, where's the best place to send people to?
So the easiest place to find me is my website is jamesbishop.io. That's where you'll find the links to everything. Or my social handles anywhere is jamesbishop.io. If you can't find me or get hold of me through one of those ways, then I don't know what I've done wrong. And I am active and will reply, and I love a DM and I love a personal message, and I love hearing feedback from podcasts. It's the only way you can get better. Love it or hate it, I relish in all that kind of stuff. Hopefully I've shared something that's resonated with somebody. If we've made a difference through this recording to one person, then it was, in my eyes, totally worth it.
Well, James, I want to thank you so much indeed for being my guest here on the Global Discussion today, and also for the advice you gave me at the beginning before we hit the record button, just in terms of my own podcasting endeavors. And if anybody wants to reach out, obviously jamesbishop.io for all the links on all the wonderful work that James does. Thanks so much to everybody who's been watching or listening to this episode around the world. Like, follow, subscribe, do all the things I need you to do to help support this new podcast. And I hope you'll join me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. James, an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for sharing all those gems with us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.